However, what I do know is that, according to the rule, one must carry out the 3 humiliations to gain access to what they guard. One of them must be performed in the high mountains, covered in thick blankets of snow and ice.
Religion in Custodia is defined by the fear of the miracle and the veneration of penance, and yet the way in which it is worshipped can vary. In my last video about the Penitent one, we spoke of the Silent Brotherhood, a separate congregation that worships the miracle in a different manner than the Central Mother of Mothers Church, and that they have their own practices and ideals. Likewise, high in the mountains belongs a separate religious sect known as the Convent of Our Lady of the Charred Visage, who also have their own beliefs and customs that focus around the veneration of an uncorrupted saint. We come into contact with this convent during our pilgrimage, because it is required of us to perform one of the 3 humiliations before the resting place of the saint that is buried here. The golden visage is drawn from the central figure of the convent's belief, Our Lady of the Charred Visage, and so it makes sense to look at the saint herself when beginning our analysis of this convent. Much like the other saints in Custodia, this lady is venerated on account of her holy suffering. From the golden thimble item, we learn that this saint was once a lady called Aurea, for the lore of this item reads, "A young villager named Aurea had such a beautiful and pious face that even as a child, statue sculptors took her as a model for their creations. Her face became so recognizable that, little by little, people took her as the living, breathing image of divinity, until it reached a point where they ended up taking her out on procession, and even replacing their own images. Such was the fervour around her, that she could not bear to be mistaken with the divinity, and burnt her face with boiling oil, to gift her pious beauty to God, and took up the habits of a convent." As with the most pious figures in the religion of the miracle, Aurea brings suffering and punishment upon herself, much like the father who begged himself to be punished, and he too was venerated for it. In Aurea's case, her beauty was such a thing to behold, that people began to conflate her with the divine, a blasphemy that she could not tolerate. Aurea, being a pious and venerable person, took her own beauty, her own blessings, and stripped them away, by burning her visage, all to appease the divine will. She gifted her beauty by taking it away from herself. She then took up the life of a nun, or a convent, according to the piece of a golden mask, which I'll show on screen, and she began to show signs of aging except for the burned wounds on her face, which were still fresh, hot and reeking. The wound was eternal, and this eternal suffering was deemed to be a miracle, and so she became canonized as a saint, Our Lady of the Charred Visage. The game's art book, which I highly recommend you check out guys by the way, tells us that her story draws inspiration from the real-world nun María Coronel, who burned her face to destroy her beauty so that King Pedro the Cruel would stop harassing her. Notably, María also founded a convent after burning her face, the Convent of St. Inés, and I will leave a link for further reading below on her if you are interested. Returning to Aurea, according to the lore of the Golden Mask, an order was founded in her name, and this is the Convent of Our Lady of the Charred Visage. Finally, the mask explains the belief of this place and their practices, for it reads, "An order was founded in her name, where all the existing nuns as well as those who wanted to take up the habit had to burn their faces in the same way Aurea had. She wears a golden mask under which she hides the gauze that alleviates the eternal pain that burns still inflict on her. These sisters of the Charred Visage are the golden masked enemies that we face in the convent in the game. These are the ones that are pulling the chain that lets the lava fall down, or the ones that are dragging the big censers behind them. Interestingly, the design of the sisters tell us of a further suffering and penance, for the art book reads the following regarding their design. The nuns' design for the Convent of the Charred Visage had to reflect the most important characteristics of their rule, such as the golden mask and their robe. In addition, we add as a weapon a censer full of boiling oil that they drag and protrude from the arms of other mysterious creatures locked in eternal suffering that we never see. So even in the censer that they hold, this is a vessel of suffering. More penance is being committed by the individual inside the censer, who again is being punished by boiling oil, much like the nuns and much like Our Lady of the Charred Visage. We can see these enemies have a face partially covered by a gold mask, and under this they add a gauze that alleviates the pain, but of course this is a secret of the convent, and to the outside world they suffer as painfully as possible as part of their ritual. So how does one come to join this convent? The convent is set very high in the mountains, overseen by the Weeping Sister that is carved into the mountain. We can actually see their position on the gateway map, which is shown in greater detail in the art book. It really is the highest peak of this region. Their position in the blistering cold is also part of their sacred penance, but we'll touch on that later on. We can communicate with a corpse on this mountain path, the graveyard of the peaks, using the shroud of dreamt sins, and the corpse says this: "It is closer now. The crying faces of ice announce the proximity of the convent. They presage the pain awaiting inside its walls. I ask the cold to be merciful, and allow me to climb to the peaks, where I will be reborn as a sister of Golden Visage." This tells us that if one wants to become a sister of the convent, then they must brave the perilous path up to the graveyard of the peaks, where no doubt many will succumb to the cold and other dangers. This is fitting, as it is a penance that you must undertake to prove you are worthy to undertake the oaths of the sisterhood. This deceased also tells us that the weeping sculpture is used to mark the convent, and could be therefore attributed as part of their design. Let us speculate on the design of this sculpture. It weeps for the suffering of those coming up the path, and for the penance of the sisters of the convent. It is meant to represent that it is weeping for the pain that initiates have to go through when joining the convent. It's also possible that these sculptures are of Ingracia, the legendary rosary craftswoman, given she is the main character in game who is associated with weeping. One of the items attributed to Ingracia is the dried flowers bathed in tears. The lore for this item reads as follows: "She was peculiar, however, because every day, after a day gathering olives, she stayed in the mountains while the rest of us left. Some said they had seen her cry, and that's why she stayed among the olive trees, to be left alone with her sorrow. Many years of drought raised the land back then, but although other crops dried up and died, the olive trees on our hill would not. They remained the best harvest to everyone's surprise. This gave rise to the rumour that the olive trees were being watered by the girl's very tears. This lore seems to suggest that her tears were holy and had some kind of miraculous properties to her, and therefore it makes sense to see a religious sculpture of her here that would feature her weeping. The miracle that we find in her tomb also seems to attribute a piece of dialogue from her that again mentions weeping. If I was to equate this idea of sacred tears to real-world inspiration, I would liken it to Mary, the Mother of Christ, and her tears. The tears of Mary are significant to some, as they are thought to represent her weeping over the sins of the world, and the sorrow that she endured during her life. If we liken this to Ingracia, we could say that she is weeping for sin and suffering for those who wish to join the convent, as well as the suffering she went through in her life. This is just my speculation, of course, and she could just be another saint that we don't know about, or a sister of the convent. But I do like this interpretation, given the location in the graveyard of the peaks, which is near where Ingracia's tomb is. It would make a little bit of sense. Returning to Aurea, the body of this saint was entombed within the convent that was built around it, as was the body of María within St. Innes. When the convent of St. Innes was reformed in the 16th century, her body was found to be in a remarkably incorrupt state. As a parallel to this, Our Lady of the Charred Visage is one of the incorruptible saints chosen by the miracle to be a source for one of the 3 golden visages. The lore from the Holy Wound of Contrition explains the role of these saints and the creation of the golden visages. The miracle created the golden visages from the very further of the uncorrupted saints, in order to preserve them eternal in the forbidden dream. So we can therefore see that term uncorrupted again, suggesting that in the eyes of the miracle, Our Lady of the Charred Visage is a pure and worthy saint because of the penance and pain that she suffered during her life and the devotion she showed to the miracle. Her body was laid to rest in the convent, and the miracle drew from it a golden visage, the visage of compunction. Compunction meaning a feeling of guilt, and so we could possibly interpret that Our Lady of the Charred Visage shed her compunction, her feeling of guilt over people conflating her beauty with the divine, when she burnt her face. Yet if she is dead, and she is resting underneath the convent, how do we explain the elephant in the room? We face a giant face manifestation of Our Lady of the Charred Visage in the convent itself. This is her giant face, burning from disfigured wounds, a golden mask melting from the sheer heat, and she provides a test for those who wish to prostrate themselves before her body and complete one of the 3 humiliation. A corpse inside the convent, which appears to have been a sister, gives us an insight into the presence of the lady within the convent. I can feel Our Lady between these walls. I can feel her warmth, for her face still burns, a reminder of her sacrifice and ours. The pain, the cold and the burn are our rules. So as an aside, there again is the mention of the cold, which is part of their suffering and their penance. Not only are they to be burned, but they are also to suffer the cold of the high mountain. Returning to the face manifestation, we can see that despite her bodily death, the saint is still present within the convent. The heat from her wounds are still felt between the walls. Yet the straight up answer to what this giant face is comes from the art book, which reads as follows: "The cruelty of the sorrowful miracle turned the lady into a giant monstrous being whose facial burns never stop burning, thus melting her golden mask." So not content to let the saint rest in peace, the sorrowful miracle transforms what is left of the saint into an exaggerated personification of her. The stench and the heat of this visage serves as an eternal reminder of the sisters of this convent and what their pact is. This intimidating visage is a horrific reminder of the sacrifice demanded by the miracle, and concurrently it serves another purpose, as a test for a true penitent who wishes to complete the 3 humiliations, and ultimately commune with the miracle upon the ash pile in the Mother of Mothers Church. Yet perhaps, during the penitent one's journey, Our Lady of the Charred Visage can finally find rest, as he slays this monstrous personification, and we can but hope, by the mercy of the miracle, that she has performed her role, and that she is now released from her torment. So thanks guys, that is my take on Our Lady of the Charred Visage and the convent. If you like this video, please give it a like and a subscribe for more blasphemous and lore content. If you'd like to join the discussion on any of these lore points or lore of any other games that I cover on my channel, please join my Discord channel, as we have a lot of like-minded people there. I'd like to thank my patrons for, again as always, helping support the channel. And finally, I'd like to thank you guys for watching this video. So I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.